Had it. All right, let's begin. Today is Monday, November 5th, the day before Election Day. Everyone remember to vote. And this is Introduction to Ethics Class 10, the Monday section. And here's the sign-in sheet. All right, so we've basically got two things to do, well, three. First we have the second part of the paper peer response exercise, and then we've got, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to wisdom, and there will be another exercise that goes with the wisdom section. So you should have brought your paper peer response with you to share with your partner, and a couple people who said they were going to be absent have emailed their responses to me, and I'll just pass those on directly right now. Alex Montanez, you here? Your partner isn't here either. And Brian Sochaki. Okay, this is from Allie. Okay, so how many people did the paper peer response? Raise your hand if you've brought something. Okay, we're good. So sit down with your partner, just talk through what you thought were the strengths and weaknesses of the paper. I want to photocopy something, and when I get back, we'll start in on wisdom. Thank you. Oh, I'm about to make an announcement about that. Okay, let's get going here. So hopefully you had two copies of your peer response, one for me and one for your peer. If you did not, then just give one to your peer and email a copy to me later if you've got an electronic copy, or if it's a paper copy, ask your peer to give it to me when they're done with it. Also, when you write your name on your peer response, please write something, like Smith reviewing Jones. That way I know. A lot of times I get these and it just has the two names on it, and I don't know who's doing the responding and who's being responded to. In any case, just leave that up here after class. Actually, alternately, if you did not make an extra copy, see me right after class and I'll run over to the photocopier and I'll make a copy for myself to verify that you have done the exercise. All right.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Do you want us to turn in, with our review, the memo that we wrote?
Yeah. Okay, so computer, and then, where am I? So let's talk about wisdom. So we're now on the fourth chapter of the book, and this is the fourth element of a morally competent individual, according to Jim Lishko. So let's just review. We saw at the beginning of the semester that almost everyone comes equipped with a certain set of moral emotions, including compassion, including anger at perceived injustices, including a desire for reciprocity, including admiration for people who are felt to be particularly noble, disgust at people and things thought to be base or unholy. And we discovered that we have willpower, and we can use that to shape our emotions. when we shape our emotions toward an end and develop them into standing dispositions, parts of your character, we wind up having virtues. So now we're going to look at wisdom. Wisdom, for our purposes, is the ability to consistently make good moral decisions. Interestingly, this is only one component of moral competence. You might think it's all of it, or, the end point of it, but it's not, for various reasons. Also, wisdom turns out to kind of play a complicated role in Lischke's system. It winds up having to accomplish several goals here. So let's just take a deeper look at this. These are some definitions of wisdoms that are given in the text. From the opening chapter, Lischke says, whereas moral sentiment, which was a part of moral emotion, right, a long-standing moral emotion, creates a desire for the good, and moral strength the power to do it, and virtues infuse our character with habits which enable us to continue to do the right thing. Wisdom is concerned with envisioning the good life and how best to achieve it. So here's the relevant part here. Wisdom is concerned with envisioning the good life and how to achieve it. On the next page, after a discussion of Aristotle, Lischke says, well, for our purposes here, the term wisdom will refer to practical wisdom. And earlier on the page, he identifies practical wisdom with Aristotle's phronesis. Phronesis was a technical term in Aristotle's philosophy. It just gets translated practical wisdom. So when we talk about wisdom here, we are talking about a kind of hands-on wisdom, the ability to act ethically. In the glossary, wisdom is defined as the ability to consistently choose correct actions. And then he suggests also having deliberative talent, discernment, good judgment, and savoir-faire, which is not only wise, but wise in French. So this is the way I conceive it in relationship to the previous chapters. Moral emotions, self-control, and the virtues are not on their own enough for us to consistently make good moral decisions. The previous three components of wisdom or of moral competence that we looked at are not sufficient for moral competence. We need more. Virtues are ways that we use our self-control to handle our emotions for some good. That is to say, emotion plus self-control plus some kind of direction is gives us a virtue. But we don't have a direction yet, right? Another way of thinking about it is that we have said that every virtue lies in the middle, between two extremes. But we also noted that everyone seems to have different ideas about where the middle is, right? I believe I mentioned my favorite George Carlin bit about every driver either being a moron or an asshole, right? The people who drive slower than you are morons. The people who drive faster than... So the truth is we need to have a better sense of where the middle lies, rather than just being able to say, well, anyone who's on one side of us has one kind of problem, and anyone to the other side of us has another kind of problem. So where do we get this direction? It's going to come from wisdom and also from knowledge. Okay. So what this means is that wisdom is going to be something that provides us with direction. Now, Aristotle had said that wisdom was actually itself a virtue. And this was part of what we had called the integral theory of the virtues. Right? The integral theory of the virtues said that the virtues were integrated with each other. They reinforced each other. And they had some kind of end built into them. Right? And that end was determined by wisdom. But what we saw there was that wisdom wasn't really like the other virtues. So it was easier to deal with it in its own chapter. As far as providing direction goes, the vision aspect of wisdom is going to be what is most important. Now, wisdom provides us with some direction, some sense of where the middle lies. So does knowledge, but knowledge is a different kind of a way of understanding the good. So here we're dealing with something that's not theoretical or scientific. That's what's emphasized when we say that wisdom is like Aristotle's phronesis. It's practical wisdom. It is a separate and needed mode of understanding, different from scientific knowledge, and it's practical. And here we want to look at two other aspects of wisdom, deliberation and judgment. I should have said this earlier. Right? Wisdom here gets broken down into vision, deliberation, and judgment. You see the good, you decide how to get there, and then you act on it. Judgment is the completion of all of this. For each of our aspects of moral competence, we can talk about what it means to lack it. Yeah, so okay, the direction for virtue comes from wisdom and knowledge, which is something that I already said. We can think about what it means to lack different things, right? So we saw that, well, what do we call someone who lacks moral emotion? What name came up in that section? A psychopath. Someone who lacks moral emotions is a psychopath. It's actually fairly clinically diagnosable. We can say that someone who lacks willpower was either weak-willed or bestial or pathologically weak, right? These are people with various kinds of impulse control problems in psychological terms. Someone who lacks virtue is vicious. I know these days that when you think of the word vicious, you mostly immediately think of like dogs or things that are physically hurtful, right? But vicious just means having a vice. So if your vice is internet gambling, you are also vicious, at least in the old-fashioned sense of the word vicious. So when it comes to someone who lacks wisdom, we're going to say that they have bad judgment. This is where I feel really parental. Are you using your good judgment, son? 7-year-olds don't take you too seriously when you try and talk about using your good judgment. All right. So the direction we're looking for comes from wisdom and knowledge. I want to take some time to highlight the differences between these two. That is, what the differences between this arrow and this arrow, right? Wisdom and knowledge. They both are essentially modes of understanding the good, but they have different approaches. I think the most important feature here, and certainly the one that everyone cottons on to immediately, is the idea that wisdom comes from experience. Your experience can be gained with the help of a mentor or a guru, but it is ultimately in some way practical. And because of that, it's got to involve you doing it, right? By contrast, knowledge is something that you get from books and classrooms. So I'll be frank here. I do not give you wisdom. I might be able to give you knowledge, or at least help you attain knowledge, right? We are studying ethics in a classroom setting, and we're reading books. I don't think I can change your willpower. I don't think I can change your virtue. I don't think I can undo a psychopath. Heal a psychopath. That's the word I was looking for. And I can't give you wisdom, but I can give you knowledge. That's what we do here in college. One thing that this means, though, if wisdom comes from experience, it effectively cannot be taught to the young. Plato famously said that no one should even try to study philosophy until they're 35. I was already teaching philosophy. I was already teaching philosophy full time by the time I was 35. Yeah.
And then back then, like the life expectancy was pretty low, so the percentage of people who actually lived to be that age was really.
Well, yeah, but of course the life expectancy was low because of high infant and childhood mortality, right? So if you were 18 in ancient Greece, you probably had almost as good a chance of seeing 35 as an 18-year-old now. If you were 5 in ancient Greece, actually the odds are you're not going to see 7, right? Because all those deaths are in early childhood. And of course, well, but certainly 35-year-old men were not unheard of. Socrates lived to be 70, and that was not unheard of. People remarked on how old he was, but he wasn't freakish. In any case. Also for the Greeks, when Plato says, don't study philosophy till you're 35, you're looking at a society where the voting age, it's a democracy, voting age and age that you serve in the army is 20, right? So again, it is fairly analogous to where we are. We do 18, they do 20. They had crappy nutrition, so they probably matured later. But in any case, so I want to actually hit a discussion here. Is it true that a young person, and we'll just say 35 just to go with, someone under 35 cannot be wise? Cannot be taught wisdom. Yeah.
Well, I guess the example that comes to mind is people talk about young people or children who just go beyond their years.
Mm-hmm.
To act really fast and self-control, things like they are young people, all that. May say they have a form of wisdom, that they understand how to behave.
Ah, young Padawan, you are wise beyond your years. Well, maybe that's just flattery, right? So, and there's specifically a reason that we're saying this, right? And that is that if you are 18, you simply haven't had enough experience to count as wise. Yeah.
I think when they said it cannot be taught to the young, I wouldn't say that's all they're after. I mean, maybe it requires a certain degree of years before you can say that the person's wise, but I don't think that they're ever too young for the older people in their life to be impressing a life of wisdom or the concept of wisdom upon them. I think it's more based on
Right. And actually this gets back to the mentor-guru thing, because this may not only be possible but necessary, right? I find, certainly as a parent, that there's a lot of advice that you press, and you know that they're not going to get it now. But they will understand later why you said or did what you said and did, right? And so the efforts to teach wisdom to the young aren't really there to make the young wise while they're young. They set the stage for the young to learn from their experiences and become wise when they are old. Well, let me try the flip side here. Rather than saying the young cannot be wise, how about old people are automatically wise? Well, and you're shaking your head back there. Why not? What? You don't think so?
No.
Okay. Well, why aren't they? Why not?
I think a lot of it has to do with character.
Okay.
And absorb the wisdom through various experiences. If you're teachable throughout years, or just
Yeah.
doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Some people don't seem to learn. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the world is full of old men and women with poor judgment, right? That's what we're calling people who aren't wise. And it seems like one reason for that is just failure to learn from experience. So experience is necessary for wisdom, but it's not sufficient. When I think of the old but not wise, I immediately think of people's racist granddads. I think a lot of people have your grandfather or your great uncle or someone, some guy in the family who was just racist, right? Actually both my grandparents were, but all four of my grandparents, both my grandfathers were just, oof. Well, part of that is that they didn't change when the times changed, right? So they don't have a certain amount of flexibility of character. My maternal grandfather, though, I think had a lot of bad judgment. And I actually blame his early success in life. He made a lot of money when he was really young, and therefore decided he was brilliant, right? He made money in real estate outside of Washington, D.C. shortly after World War II. Now, if you know economic history, you'd realize that a monkey could have made money in that market. But he decided that this meant that he was a brilliant businessman, and so he spent the next 50 years frittering all that money away on one harebrained scheme after another. I mention this not because I like telling stories about my family, but because it illustrates, I think, an important feature of wisdom. It comes from experience, but it also requires often failure. It requires negative experience. And on top of that, you have to be able to learn from that failure, right? And that requires humility. One thing that you see with the people who keep making the same mistakes for decades is that they're frequently unwilling to admit that they failed because they made a mistake. That actually was a dumb business plan. And in anything but the most booming economy, you are bound to lose money. Well, all right. So I want to return to this question of wisdom. and age. Are there, yeah.
I'm wondering, like, how does one strive to get wisdom? Is it something you try to get, or is it something that happens to you?
The language that I'm used to using here is that it's something you have to be open to, which is, I think, different than striving to get it. But maybe I'm mischaracterizing things. Certainly, if you are closed to it, you can live to a ripe old age and not get it, right? A lot of the virtues that I was talking about are virtues essentially of open-mindedness, right? Humility, that sort of thing. Maybe you want to think of curiosity as something that's important and something that's more positive. That, it's not just openness, it's actual directedness. You have to go out there and seek out the new. And I think I've got, yeah. So for each of our elements of moral competence, we can talk about where it comes from. And with wisdom, I want to say that wisdom is acquired by experience in those with the virtues to learn from experience, right? And so openness is important here, but there might also be drive, perseverance, curiosity. They say that to teach curiosity to children have to have the experience. This is just what the parenting handbooks say, and Lord knows how authoritative they actually are. But they say children need the experience of asking a question and getting a satisfying answer, right? And that promotes curiosity because they feel like now the whole process of questioning and answering has been reinforced, rewarded. They got some pleasure out of it. Which is why you're supposed to answer all of those incredibly annoying questions they keep asking. And something like that might be true in the pursuit of wisdom as well. You have to be in that, eventually, you have to develop the habit of asking questions, receiving answers, taking joy from that. All right. A couple other things about wisdom in comparison to knowledge. When we look at knowledge, we're going to see that it is conveyed by theories. It is essentially a propositional enterprise or some sort of representation of the world. When we talk about wisdom, we're not going to talk about theories or definite ideas. We're going to talk about more vague things, stories, proverbs, examples, metaphors, the things that actually typically are used in practical situations to muddle your way through. Also, a lot of the stories, proverbs, metaphors, and examples that we're going to be looking at are bound to culture. That is, it is the wisdom of a people. It is the wisdom of a place and a time. Because it is social wisdom, or because most practical action is bound to society, wisdom is going to be mostly, it's going to have a heavy social knowledge component. And when society changes, your wisdom can be out of date, right? Knowledge, on the other hand, at least strives to be universal. And so in chapter 5, that's when we're going to begin to talk about universal moral truths, including whether there are any, right? People can get really skeptical when you talk about universal moral truths. I will, however, give you a brief preview of universal moral truth. Torturing babies for your sexual gratification is morally wrong. See, that wasn't so hard. Universal moral truth. Okay. The study of wisdom as a practical enterprise, something conveyed through metaphors and proverbs by gurus and wise men. This is something that you see in what we call a sagacious tradition all over the world. That is, all over the world there are sagacious traditions, wisdom literature. This was also talked about in the beginning of your book when it contrasted the sagacious approach to ethics with the modern approach to ethics. The modern approach is something that we associate with the attempt to acquire knowledge. It is a phenomenon that occurs after the scientific revolution, where we have a sense that there's a way of understanding that can be more definite and concrete and quantitative than the wisdom of the sages. Finally, like I said before, wisdom here is practical wisdom. It's about answering the question, what should I do? Knowledge is ultimately theoretical knowledge, or as Aristotle called it, theoretical wisdom. So it's about what I should believe. Yeah.
Thinking about sagacious traditions, if wisdom is something that comes from being exposed to experience and gaining wisdom through that, why then we often look for wisdom in people who don't do much? Like sages are like sit around think and don't.
That's an interesting question. Is that so? Do sages sit around and think?
I mean, you can look at like Buddhist monks; they tend their gardens and stuff. But, like, they're not really in the society that other people are experiencing. So is their wisdom really?
Yeah. There is within many traditions there are, I think, there are monastic traditions. There are renunciate traditions, right? The Buddhists have monastics. Christians, have monasteries too. And a lot of the early Christian, a lot of the early followers of Christ were renunciates. They call them the desert fathers. They went out into the desert and, just sat in pits and, I don't know, mortified the flesh or something. This is definitely a picture of wisdom, but I don't think it's the only picture of wisdom in the sagacious traditions themselves. A lot of what I have studied in this part of ethics comes from Greece and Rome, and there the wise men were typically seasoned politicians and generals, right? You see a lot of people who serve the emperor for a while, and then when they're thrown out of power for whatever reason, they go back to their villas and write books on how to do politics, right? Or there are people like Aristotle himself, who was the teacher to an emperor, right? Alexander the Great. Not an emperor, but a general, a conqueror, someone who created an empire. They are people with long experience in politics. That shows, I think, what kind of wisdom people are looking for, right? I mean, when you try and find your mentor, you look for an old, withered war general, you have one idea of wisdom. And if you look for a guy in a cave out in the mountains that you have to climb to, right? You're going to find a different kind of wisdom. I think they still both wind up being practical wisdom, though. They're not about abstract knowledge. They're about how to live some kind of life well. But one of them is more social than the other. That was a good point. I like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's been, since the mid-20th century, a very powerful tradition of activist monks throughout Southeast Asia, and I guess up into Central Asia, well, Tibet. Thich Nhat Hanh was the monk who led the protests against the the U.S. occupation of Vietnam. Very powerful stuff. There are monks. There's some interesting environmentalist monks working right now in Thailand who, I like this, they ordain trees to protect forests. They announce that different trees are actually reincarnations of important Buddhas. And no one wants to chop down that tree anymore. That's the reincarnation of the 37th Buddha of compassion or whatever. And yeah, so there are engaged, and there are engaged monks engaged monastic monks and nuns in the Christian tradition as well. It is, however, an institution that originally developed as a renunciation, right, withdrawing from the world. Even though events can often draw people out of their monasteries and back into the streets. All right. Okay, so let's look at how wisdom is comprised according to Lischka. This is another one of these flow charts, the organizational charts of ethics. Something about the bureaucratic mind being applied here. But in any case, wisdom, so this is again redrawn from your textbook. I added a layer here that's actually in the textbook. It just wasn't represented in the chart. We begin with the idea that wisdom is the ability to consistently choose morally correct actions, right? Wisdom is this practical understanding of how to live in the world. That is then broken up into three components according to Lischka: vision, deliberation, and judgment. Vision is your understanding of the universe and society and yourself as moral entities, right? It is a sense of who you are and what the good is. Deliberation is practical reasoning to find a means to an end, and then judgment puts them all together, concluding an action. So vision tells you where you want to go. It is a vision not in the sense of a hallucination or even a visitation from an angel. It is a vision in the sense of, I have a dream, right? A picture of the way the world could be, should be. Deliberation finds the means to attain that vision. And you put that together in practical action and judgment. All right. For the last part of this class, I want to look at vision. And I want to start with, so we can do vision on several levels. A cosmic level, a communal level, a social level, and an individual level. And right now, I just want to look at a moral cosmic vision. This is a sense of how the universe is structured and what the role of morality is in the universe. And I said earlier that wisdom is generally conveyed by stories, proverbs, analogies. So I want to specifically, when we talk about wisdom, when we talk about vision, I want to talk about stories that convey moral vision. All right. And what's going to be particularly important here, I think, are origin stories. Stories of how things came to be tell us about the moral order of those things. And so when we talk about cosmic vision, I think one of the best things to look at is a vision of the origin, a story of the origin of the universe, the origin of everything. So Genesis gives us that kind of story. The book of Genesis, right? How does the story of creation there go? I know you know it.
God divided everything for one.
Divided the heavens and the earth. Yeah. Yes. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. The thing about the division of heaven and earth, I think, is it goes back to the Babylonian stuff about, yeah. But in any case, God said, "Let there be light." There was light. And God looked at the light and said it was good. Right? You get ethics. You get a sense of the ethical order of the universe right there in the beginning of Genesis. God created the world is good. On the next day he separated the heavens and the earth. The day after that he made some plants. And then after that he made, I don't know, dogs. And each time he says they're good. And the origin of, and then he makes people. People live in paradise until they fall. This lets you know what the world is like. The world is good but fallen. It's a sense of the moral order of the universe. Lishka, in your textbook, contrasts that with a different origin story for the universe, which comes from the Tlingit, which are a native Alaskan ethnic group near, I think, where he lives in Anchorage. But did people read that? Did people catch? How does that story go?
I don't remember right off the top of my head, but it's interesting. I mean, it was maybe more typical of, Native American folklore.
Well, it involved a raven,
Yeah.
right? that makes it pretty classically Native
I
American.
do remember that it gave like, I don't know how to say it. It didn't start with everything being good. It started
Right.
with the raven having faults. He had faults, and so it also
Yeah.
justifies the faults we see in the world today.
Raven as a creator god in this, rather than being an all-perfect creator god, is kind of an impatient, clumsy creator god. So Raven went to a place where there's some dirt and rocks. He tried to put them together, but they don't stick. That Raven, he's got a temper, so he kicked the rocks and swore until he hurt his toes. Right? That's the creation of the universe. And it's created by an imperfect God. It's an imperfect universe. It's barely holding itself together. Gives you a different vision of the moral order of the universe. I remember, I think it's in The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Joseph Campbell talks about, I don't know how accurate this is as anthropology, but I thought it was a wonderful story. A South Pacific island where their creation story involves essentially God and God's retarded cousin, right? And so God makes a dolphin and then God's retarded cousin makes a shark. I should clean up my language there. You're not supposed to, God, well.
It's not PC.
No, you're not supposed to say retarded.
I thought you were saying.
Yeah, I'm so.
What's the name of that island?
I know. I remember reading about it in Joseph Campbell, and I understand anthropologists say that he gets all his anthropology wrong, but it's still a good story. I'll have to look that up. All right. So stories tell us about the moral order of the universe. That's roughly the idea here. And so one thing that happens in this section is that Lischka gives us a rough typology of kinds of stories and what they tell us about the moral order of the universe. Right? And so he opens with, I think, an interesting contrast here between two visions. He sometimes calls them romances and comedies, but he is using both the word romance and the word comedy in an old-fashioned sense. So it's better to use modern words, melodrama and Thalian story. So melodramas, romances in the old-fashioned sense, are stories where good and evil are well-defined real features of the universe, right? Characters are color-coded. Superheroes wear red, white, and blue. Supervillains wear purple and orange. Black, maybe, right? The good guys have white hats. The bad cowboys have black hats. The good Jedis have blue lightsabers. The bad Jedis have red lightsabers. I haven't seen past I haven't seen the second set of movies, and I don't even want to hear about them. If they've got different colored lightsabers, I don't know about it. Right? Okay. Good and evil are color-coded because good and evil are real parts of the world. Good triumphs and evil is punished. The hero is a faithful and trustworthy warrior, right? I think this presents us with a very different vision of the universe than what Lischka calls the Thalian story. Now, this is actually what we call a comedy in the old-fashioned sense of comedy, in the sense of Shakespeare's comedies. Does anyone know how Shakespeare's comedy, what makes one of Shakespeare's plays a comedy as opposed to some of the other plays he writes? It ends in a marriage. They're not always particularly funny, although some of them are hysterical. Comedies end in a marriage. Tragedies end with everyone dead, right? Everyone dead except for one guy moaning over all the bloody bodies on stage, right? That's the rule. Comedies end with a marriage. So in the Thalian stories, these are essentially stories that end with a marriage. Evil is misunderstanding and imbalance. And goodness occurs when evil is brought back into the fold, when balance is restored. The hero here is someone who brings people together. I don't suppose anyone's seen A Midsummer Night's Dream. Who knows how it goes? You did? Do you remember any of it?
It was 8th grade-ish.
So you probably couldn't follow it that well.
I watched it.
Well, I'm glad at least they're exposing you to the classics in the sense of putting them in front of you. So the deal is two couples go into the woods at a party, and elves screw things, or fairies, mess things up so people are in love with the wrong people. Everyone gets love potion in their ears, and everyone is in love with the wrong person. So the world is out of balance. Harmony is restored when the right people are in love with the right people and everyone gets married. Right? Imbalance restoration. You don't have permanent bad guys. In the melodrama, the resolution of the story is the bad guy being punished. Spider-Man, wraps Green Goblin in webs, ties him to a lamppost with a note for the police. And this is satisfying. It is morally satisfying. It is satisfying to see wrongdoers punished. In older literature, the punishments are more harsh, right? So in comic books these days, everyone has to just go to jail. Joker always has to go to Arkham Asylum, no matter what he's done. But when mighty Odysseus came back to Ithaca and found that people had betrayed him in his absence, he hung 9 of his serving maids from the neck by the same rope, right? This was justice, a little bit harsher. Okay. So the Thalian stories don't have punishment at the end. They have reunion. Now, often, in real life, stories will combine elements. Right? You don't normally see stories that are all one thing or all another. But these can serve as sort of templates, archetypes that real stories play around with. So yeah, Shakespeare's comedies, Star Trek, as opposed to Star Wars, is Thalian, I claim. Dr. Seuss is relentlessly Thalian. These are, I think, the stories that have positive endings. There are also darker moral visions. Satire, in this case, is not something that's funny. It is a vision of the universe where there is a moral order, but it has been inverted by modern society, right? Gulliver's Travels, there's a lot of good satire from the Enlightenment. Gulliver's Travels, Candide. You discover that the world is not what you think it is. This is still, satire is still a world of black hats and white hats. It's just that it turns out that the guy with the white hat is the bad guy, and you didn't know it, right? So the hero is someone who escapes naivete, realizes that, oh my God, the black hats are actually the good guys. Still has a moral order, though. 2 other forms of story. Irony is a story in which there's actually just no moral order in the world, where the moral order is permanently inaccessible. The hero, if there is one, is a person who can reconcile himself or herself to life's limitations. So Kafka is a great example of irony in this sense. Let's see if I can grab this quickly. I may not have audio still. Okay. Kafka International Airport. Is this going to come up? So this is from The Onion. This is the fictional Kafka International Airport, and I still don't have sound. Grr. Where's my little, oh, there's my icon. See? Skip. Oh, well. Does anyone know Kafka? Has anyone had to read Kafka? Kafka, a brilliant early 20th century writer, wrote a story called The Trial about a guy who is arrested. They won't tell him what the charges are. He deals with a bunch of crazy bureaucracy and then is shot. Another great Kafka story is called Metamorphosis. It's about a guy who wakes up one morning and finds that he's been transformed into a giant roach. And he runs around for a while, becoming more and more roach-like. His family hates him, and then he dies. You get the sense that is an ironic vision. right? No moral order. It is the moral order of the universe is inaccessible if it's there at all. Like I said before, you often, in real stories, often involve combining elements here. So if anyone has read the comic books of Alan Moore, I think he often is engaged, particularly in Watchmen. He is putting a level of irony in this very specific sense of meaninglessness on top of the standard superhero narrative, which is basically melodramatic. All right. And so the final kind of story we're given here is the tragic story. It's the story of an individual or family who fails a melodramatic moral order. And the classics all come up here: Oedipus Rex, Hamlet, Antigone, Lear, Death of a Salesman, that sort of thing. All right. So this is what I want you guys to do. This is my little exercise. I'm convinced that stories shape our moral worldview far more than anything else. And so this exercise here is just called Your Stories. And I want you to think about the stories that you grew up with. I'm particularly interested in stories you heard as a child, but if you just want to talk about stories that affected you personally that you saw as a teenager or a grown-up, that's fine too. I want you to try to classify them in this scheme here as melodramas or Thalian stories or tragedies or whatever. Yeah, I mean, like if you've got, do you need one? No, okay. Yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, that would be okay. I am interested here mostly in cultural heritage, right? But certainly experiences as a child, if they fit nicely one of these narrative visions, that would be useful. If you've got children, think about what stories they read now, right? Or you read to them now. So let's just take 5 minutes and write down some, and then we can get back together and share. See what kind of vision your stories encode. Oops. Okay, let's talk for a second. Stories. What movies have you guys seen recently? Well, you said you had a life experience. Did you want to share it?
It was a tragedy.
Oh.
When I was very, very small. My grandfather unfortunately committed suicide in the occupied house. And I remember when I was little, I had trouble understanding it, but as I grew older, it was a shame, the mental illness, the treatments back then were not like they are now. They didn't recognize the treatments. And I can always remember, being a little odd.
Mm-hmm.
And the family always said, well, he's ill. But he was actually quite ill.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's definitely that's definitely tragic in the ordinary sense of really sad. Here with tragedies as a story type, it's that there's a more detailed sense of how it works, and it is a going back again to Aristotle. There's a lot of theories about how this kind of story is supposed to work, but The tragedies ultimately have to be stories of good men failing, right? And I mean, a suicide can be like that. Generally, though, it's a good men failing who have a moral failing, and we don't think of mental illness as a moral failing. Whereas people like Oedipus Rex actually are supposed to have a moral failing which caused their downfall. People know Oedipus Rex? Yes? What did Oedipus do? Yep, that's it. That's a moral failing. Yeah. When he realized what he had done wrong, he gouged his eyes out. Yeah.
For tragedies, I like the movie Braveheart.
Okay.
William Wallace, you know Braveheart, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to remember how it...
Mike Stalin.
Uh-huh.
Overthrow King Lear, who's ruling over them. And in the end of the movie, in the middle of the movie, he's betrayed by one of his close allies. And that's why he's captured and executed at the end of the movie. So it wasn't his moral failing, not William Wallace's, not Braveheart's.
Right.
The moral failings of those
People around him.
agencies.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. All right, well, let's scoot back up here. Anyone write down anything that you think counts as a straight melodrama? Maybe something that you watched, a story you read growing up? Power Rangers. My 7-year-old loves Power Rangers. Man. Color-coded superheroes, for sure. Good and evil. Yeah. Yeah.
I thought of Robin Hood for that, but I was wondering if that might be like a satire.
Yeah.
Robin Hood is like a thief.
Robin Hood is a thief. It turns out that the king is the bad guy and the thief, and the highwayman living in the woods is the good guy. But there is still a real moral order, right? It's just that the proper king is away at the Crusades, right? And that has been, so the proper order has to be restored when the correct king comes back. Ooh. Okay. Well, it's full of satire in the ordinary sense of making fun of people, like, mimicking them. It seems to have a good guy, bad guy sense to it because, a melodramatic sense, right? Because, Bugs is the good guy, the hunter is the bad guy. Maybe there's a bit of inversion there because we normally identify with the human rather than with the rabbit, right? So there's an inversion there. Sometimes there's also a sense of real irony and meaninglessness, right? There's that great one where it's like there's a wolf and a sheepdog that's supposed to protect the sheep, and in the morning they show up and they clock into work. There's a little they clock in, how you doing, Sam? How you doing, Bill? Clock in, and then they start fighting, right? And then when the lunch bell rings, they clock out. They stop fighting. Yeah. So there's a sense that grand moral conflict actually doesn't mean anything. That gives you a bit more irony. All right. Well, we're out of time. So just a quick preview. This class we talked about vision and stories that accompany vision, right? That might accompany different moral worldviews. Next class we're going to talk about deliberation, how to make decisions. And we're going to talk about the role of proverbs in moral decision making. And I'll see you next week. So leave all your exercises up here, the paper-peer response and the story exercise. If you need me to make a copy of anything, just come up here and I'll grab a copy for it.